Good afternoon. I am overwhelmed, actually. I see so many ambassadors around. But let me recognize all of them. Excellency Hazel Gubeni, High Commissioner of the Republic of South Africa. My very two good friends, Ambassador J. Sudasan, our non-resident ambassador to Ethiopia and the African Union, and Dilip Naya, Ambassador Dilip Naya, our non-resident ambassador to Ghana, and also to many other distinguished panel speakers who will later join us on the on the rostrum. And to all of you, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming this afternoon. And actually, it is really my distinct pleasure to welcome all of you to the inaugural seminar held in conjunction with the NTU Center for African Studies Distinguished Visiting Fellow Program, and also welcome and introduce Mr. Paulo Gomez as our Distinguished Visiting Fellow, as you have heard, under the fellowship, under the sponsorship of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Very quickly, I think for some of you who may not know what the NTU-SBF Center for African Studies does, so let me just take a very few moments to say a few words. The NTU Center for African Studies is a unique trilateral platform with government, business, and academic to promote knowledge and expertise on Africa, as well as to accelerate the deepening business and trade ties between Asia and Africa. The main objective is to provide thought leadership on Africa, building capacity for governments and executives, and fostering an integrated Africa network within Singapore and Southeast Asia. At this point, also let me take this opportunity to recognize my very good friend, Mr. Paulo Gomez. As you have heard, he is our first Distinguished Visiting Fellow, and he is a native of Guinea-Bissau, an accomplished senior business advisor who previously served as the executive director for 25 African countries at the World Bank and on the board of directors of the West African Development Bank. Throughout his career, Paulo has been actively involved in advancing business ties between Africa and the region. In 2010, he co-organized the first edition of the Africa Southeast Asia Business Forum in Singapore, which incidentally led to the creation of the Africa Southeast Asia Chamber of Commerce based in Singapore. He is currently the chairman of the Chamber's advisory board. Therefore, we are very delighted at CAS that Paulo is our first Distinguished Visiting Fellow. And he shares with us his considerable experience and expertise in key sectors such as banking, private equity, and mining that will undoubtedly benefit the Center for African Studies and Singapore businesses in our journey in changing perceptions on Africa. Also, it will help to show and showcase to investors the continent's growth potential and explaining to the layman the importance of the world's last frontier. In this context, let me start by saying that Africa is booming, from basket case to a potential bread basket, from dodgy investor to investor opportunity. Despite economic headwinds dragged down by the impact of lower oil prices, the Africa rising narrative remains intact and sustainable. Numbers sometimes do get massaged to suit the message. But by every estimate, there is every reason to see it as the aspiring global growth engine. So what has changed? In one sense, ignorance about sub-Saharan region created by a media that focuses on security, famines, and disasters, blinding many to the business realities of the area. But in another sense, everything has changed, or rather, it has been doing so for about 15 years. At the end of the colonial period, many of the states in the region became very centralized and socialistic economies, which proved to be inefficient and did little to develop the area. Corruption became endemic. Since the mid-90s, however, there has been a move towards more open societies and economies, less corruption, and increased growth. Therefore, this perception that Africa has reached a turning point, one qualitatively different from previous false dawns, stems from a combination of global and regional circumstance. Let me give you 3 reasons. Firstly, Africa is increasingly now viewed as an opportunity rather than a burden. While Africa today accounts for only about 5% of global foreign direct investment flows, the World Bank predicts FDI into sub-Sahara Africa to reach 40.8 billion, up from 32 billion in 2011, and by 2015, it is forecasted that capital flows will reach US dollars 150 billion. Big numbers. In 2014, Africa accounted for 9 of the 15 fastest growing economies globally. Today, 26 of Africa's 54 countries have achieved middle income status. The last decade saw sustained growth across Africa, with GDP growth rates of 5% or more for most countries. They were achieved despite slow growth in developed economies and softer growth in demand for many commodities, leading to weaker prices and hence export earnings. Increasingly, Africa's development has been powered by rapidly expanding private consumption and a gradually improving business environment. In the past 9 years, the costs of starting a business in Africa have typically reduced by more than 2/3, while delays in time taken to start a business have been halved. With such dizzying numbers and game-changing events, a buzz of opportunity is spreading across the African continent and is manifesting itself in investment, growth strategies, even in hiring opportunities for the executive salaries on offer. Secondly, the African macroeconomic environment is transforming as policymakers have pushed through painful structural adjustment programs, established independent central banks, and adopted pragmatic fiscal and monetary policies, all of which have helped to create a more business-enabling environment. Also critical has been the decline of armed conflict. Once the scourge of Africa, intra and interstate wars have declined by over 60% since the beginning of the millennium. In turn, political stability in much of Africa is becoming the norm rather than the exception, as countries democratize and begin to set their own agendas. We are also seeing positive implementation in greater desire of regional cooperation and custom unions between trading and political blocs. There are also increasing improvements to infrastructure, a common unified desire to modernize and move towards sustainable growth. To modernize and move towards sustainable growth paths, in addition to increasing purchasing power and consumer needs. Thirdly, while commodities are the bedrock of Africa's future, what has really sparked optimism recently is that consumer goods and services are also taking off. The rapid expansion of banking, telecommunications, and other services has surged. But the single largest business opportunity in Africa will be its rising consumer market. Africa's population is expected to more than double from 1.1 billion to 2.4 billion by 2050, the biggest increase of any continent. Its people are the youngest in the world, with a median age of just 19.4 years. Their youthful demographic profile is expected to endure. The combination of economic and demographic growth is creating an expanding consumer class with spending power. Consumer spending in Africa reached US $600 billion in 2010 and is expected to hit almost US $1 trillion by 2020. The continent's domestic markets are among the most compelling attractions for foreign investors, compounded by rapid urbanization across Africa. Domestic demand will drive private sector growth, especially in consumer-facing industries and business and healthcare services, accelerating diversification of FDI in Africa. But to prevent this demographic nightmare, radically new models of economic development, including sustainable production and consumption, are urgently needed. Of course, there are challenges. Africa is a continent and does not function as one market. It's a single market. In a continent of 54 countries, generalizations are hard to make. But for sure, investing across the continent is not for the faint-hearted and requires patience and perseverance. My favorite African proverb, and I think it resonates well here, and I've used it actually in my opening remarks when the Center for African Studies was launched. And I quote, "If you want to go fast, then travel alone. If you want to go far, then travel together." I think it resonates well. Going in packs is better than going in singly. Africa is a massive growth market. So for people who can weigh up risk and reward, it can be really great. For others with families or other factors to consider, it can be more difficult. In the end of the day, for investors, for visitors, for Africans themselves, seeing is believing. The growth is tangible. Ladies and gentlemen, go see for yourself. Finally, I thank all of you for your presence and the red carpet lineup of other speakers that will follow the panel discussion, the Q&A. I'm confident that this afternoon will further enrich your appreciation and understanding of Africa. Thank you so much.